We're going to take the next 10 minutes for me to share my story. So I want to start off another quote. Many people who know me, they call me the quote queen. I love my quotes. And it's a quote by mythologist and storyteller Michael Meade. And he says, "At critical junctures, outer trouble and the inner need to grow conspire to set each of us on a path of awakening and initiation." And this was really the essence of what I experienced when I was 10 years old. It was really a core memory, and I was watching a short film on humanitarian aid workers, and I found myself falling to my knees crying, just witnessing some of the purest expressions of human goodness I've ever seen, and the willingness to meet the world's rage and suffering with love and service, and to live for something greater than yourself. And I knew from that very moment on, that's what I wanted to do. I don't know what it was, but I want to do just that. But I needed to understand why so much suffering could exist in a beautiful world when this planet provides everything we need. And there's so much goodness around us. What's really driving the violence? And in my time working at the high school, this was a question that was at the core of a lot of the kids who were suffering. So I know I'm not alone, and maybe many of you have felt this in your own lives. If we wish to be free, we must understand the ways in which we're not. So I needed to follow the truth wherever it led, and even into the darkest corners of our collective story. It felt like a moral imperative for me. And what I found there shattered my innocence and my idealism. It forced me to ask deeper questions beyond the two-party system and beyond media narratives that are engineered to hijack our emotions and manipulate our opinion. This is for all types of media, including independent media now. And it forced me to ask deeper questions beyond the exclusive race and gender social justice narratives that I was immersed in when I was running a wellness center and doing restorative justice work at a high school. 3 years ago, I became director for a nonprofit information service dedicated to uncovering the hidden forces shaping history and driving global events today, regardless of who's elected into office. And we weave together some of the darkest truths of major issues with the visionary and inspiring ideas and movements and people that are working to transform those very systems. So after years of dedicating my life to media studies and social justice activism and restorative justice and public education, nothing could have prepared me for the darkness I faced when I took on this work. And I had to, and maybe many of you have found this as well, that I had to walk through the fire of disillusionment about everything I thought I knew about how the world worked. And I remembered asking myself, how do I trust human goodness again? Human goodness is what helped me survive in my childhood, and now I don't know anymore. I just remembered thinking, how do I walk in this world knowing what I know? And given all the noise in society, how do I know what's real? Eventually, I went back to that little 10-year-old Amber who was so touched by this humanitarian aid worker, and I reminded myself of what I'm here to do. That my activism felt most effective and empowered when I was focused on what I wanted and what I was for, and not just what I was against and what I was afraid of. To do what I later heard that stopped me in my tracks. To create the world you want, you must know yourself beyond the distress of oppression and fear. To create the world you want, you must know yourself beyond the distress of oppression and fear. A clear, positive vision draws people in, and it brings people together. And what I've come to find is that what transforms a violent world isn't just more negative news and the same old talking points. It's the relationships that break the cycle of separation and fear and dehumanization. And so a big part of my 20s was learning about nonviolent activism. For those who may not be familiar, so I really got involved in the Season for Nonviolence, which is a global grassroots campaign dedicated to building on the power of a nonviolent mass movement to awaken consciousness within ourselves, within our relationships, within our activism, in our world. And I was so touched by what I was learning that I began teaching this in the Holistic Health Studies Leadership Program at San Francisco State. And we looked at, what is violence? How does it really show up in our lives and in the world? How do we help heal and repair violence? And how do we open up to truth, goodness, beauty, and love? If I could sum up all my experiences bringing hundreds of circles of people who never thought they'd be in the same room together, I've learned something that's really stayed at the core of me, which is it's not our differences that divide us. It's the judgment about our differences. Something that I think about all the time is how do we cultivate the emotional strength and the intellectual curiosity to stay open when times get really hard. Especially when we're feeling the energy and things feel really crazy in the world right now. And so Martin Luther King Jr., who really was so inspired by the work of nonviolence, the reason why he found nonviolence was because of Mahatma Gandhi, who was leading a nonviolent revolution against the British colonial rule in India. And both of these men actually were murdered for their courageous work. That's why the season for nonviolence starts on the anniversary of Mahatma Gandhi's assassination on January 30th, and it ends on April 4th, which is the anniversary of Martin Luther King Jr. He began to build his own model, and he found that the first step in nonviolent activism was something he called self-purification, transforming our internal state and cleansing our hearts of the weapons of the unhealthy ego. So that could be retaliation, moral superiority, judgment, us versus them thinking, enemy making, or even the need to control or win an argument. That King understood that if we carry this into our activism, we simply recreate the very systems we're trying to change. The first nonviolent principle that really shaped me is ahimsa, and that's the refusal to harm, hate, or dehumanize while still seeking justice. That if we use dehumanization to fight dehumanization, we keep the collective trauma alive. Kazu Haga, who does restorative justice work in prisons, he has a beautiful quote: "If we carry intergenerational trauma, we also carry intergenerational wisdom." And the second one is satyagraha, or truth force. So the ability to stand in our truth without needing to dominate or destroy another person. So what is truth? Well, for Gandhi, truth wasn't really facts. It wasn't really ideas. It wasn't, my side's version of reality. It was really what he called the ultimate truth, a moral and spiritual reality that connects us beyond ideology, beyond tribe, beyond religion, beyond political identity. In fact, Gandhi believed that truth could only reveal itself through open dialogue and listening, humility, and most importantly, an earnest seeking, a lifelong willingness to question. So he said, if I'm committed to truth, then before I judge others, I must be willing to discover where I may be wrong, where I may not yet see clearly. I must be willing to be changed by what I discover, not clinging to beliefs for the sake of ego or even my social or political identity. That I must be willing to listen as deeply as I speak, knowing that my view is only one thread in a much larger reality. And lastly, and this is a more modern take, is I must have the courage to be a voice and not an echo. To be a voice and not an echo. Because it's really easy to repeat what my side says, and it's really easy to see something on social media and just be like, yeah, that's how I think, or what my favorite news outlet says. So what does my deep conscience really feel and think? We got to really go deeper below the media narratives to figure that out. And it may take time for us to develop the skills, but this is what I've become passionate about, is how do we develop those skills? So let's all just take a deep breath and let it out. Maybe just take one more, and maybe on that next inhale, let out whatever calls to you. Inhale and let it out. Yeah. I'm going to close this off by talking about awe and wonder. Most of us have had an experience. Actually, I would say all of us have had an experience, but maybe we may not be open to it, or the busyness of our lives catches up. But it could be a profound experience in nature, or a piece of music, or an idea or experience that changes what we believe is possible, and suddenly we see the world in a new way. They dissolve these boundaries that sometimes we're just unconsciously living. When I opened up to the world of UFOs and consciousness, and even the science of near-death experiences, where science is now showing that consciousness does not end when the body dies. And people, many of them who've been declared clinically dead, coming back to life, sometimes waking up in the morgue, with fascinating experiences and stories that defy all conventional understanding of reality. What's going on? These topics reminded me that we're all part of something much larger, a much larger evolutionary story greater than any of us, and greater than this current moment in time and how crazy things feel. And what I learned really helped me heal my paralyzing fear of death. I would have a lot of sleep paralysis about the death of my loved ones. What I've come to find is that when you no longer fear death, you also become less easy to control. You start questioning the stories that tell us to be afraid, and questioning the stories that tell us to hate that group or hate that person. Stories that tell us to fear the future and believe that the world is beyond repair, or that we're beyond repair. The darkness of the world that had so much power over me, suddenly the darkness of the world lost its power over me. And I found myself discovering a strength to face the darkness in our world, to not turn away from it or go into my reactivity and make it personal. And also the courage to be curious about what I don't know. When we get out of our singular viewpoint, we're often told we're going to be indulging in dangerous misinformation or hateful ideology. But I found the exact opposite was true. When I started reaching beyond the narratives I found so much certainty in. And when I surrendered my certainty, I found actual incredible nuance and complexity in the places and the groups and in the ideas I was told to immediately hate or debunk. And I witnessed change, healing, and transformation in places I never thought possible. Social polarization and the culture wars and the identity politics and the negative news overload and the doom and gloom narratives just drumming into us all the time. These are all symptoms of a larger problem, that we're operating inside a very small story of what it means to be human. I would suggest that each of us can become a regulating presence. People whose very energy helps regulate the hijacked nervous system of the collective. This openness has a ripple effect. It changes how we listen, how we speak, and how others feel in our presence. And when we bring this state into our relationships or our activism, we can become the kind of person whose grounded energy helps others relax, helps others think in new ways they might not have considered before, helps others open to goodness and imagine new possibilities. And I have worked with all types of people, and I still continue. Our organization has thousands of people from all across the political spectrum. It's hard, but I'm learning so much. And how can we, as Howard Thurman says in his speech, bring out the sound of the genuine in ourselves and other people? What's the sound of the genuine? Thank you. Yeah.